So, India's latest budget. A lot of people were expecting fireworks, right? A big, bold move. But according to noted columnist Shankar Iyer, the real story is, well, it's what wasn't in the budget. We're going to dive into his take on why this was really a budget of caution, defined more by what it didn't do than what it did.
All right, so here's our game plan for breaking down AR's analysis. First, we'll hit his main argument, his thesis. Then we'll get into what he calls these surgical nudges. After that, we'll talk about the big bang that everyone was waiting for, but never got. And then we'll cover the big questions that are still hanging in the air, and wrap up with his final verdict on the whole thing.
Okay, let's kick things off with the big one. What's Shankar Ayar's main point? What's the central idea that shapes his entire critique of the government's playbook here?
It really boils down to this one phrase he used. Fill the gaps budget, no big bang here. I mean, that says it all, doesn't it? He's arguing this was never about some grand, sweeping transformation. He sees it as an exercise in pure caution, kind of like patching a few small holes in a ship instead of, rebuilding the whole thing from scratch.
You see, a lot of people in the market were hoping for what's called a 1991 moment. A throwback to that huge year when India just threw open its economy with these massive game-changing reforms. But as Iyer points out, the government really resisted what he calls that let's do something itch. They decided to play it safe, taking a much more predictable road, trying to walk that fine line between market hype and what the public was hoping for.
Okay, so if there was no big bang, then what was in the budget? Well, this is where AR brings up this idea of surgical nudges. A whole bunch of small, really targeted interventions. Let's take a closer look at what he's talking about.
And this is where you really see what he means by getting lost in the weeds, or the minutia. IR points to tons of these tiny, almost microscopic changes. I mean, we're talking about stuff like a duty exemption for castor oil cake, rule changes for how seafood gets processed, customs tweaks for microwave oven parts. See, each one is a little nudge for a very specific industry. It's a total bottom-up approach, not that big top-down vision.
So, while all these tiny little tweaks are happening on one side, Iyer points out that the government's main plan for growth, well, it's something we've seen before. The core strategy is still all about pumping big money into physical infrastructure.
And wow, the numbers really tell that story. The budget set aside a massive 12.2 lakh crore rupees just for infrastructure. That really shows you, right? While they're kind of tinkering around the edges with all those small nudges, their biggest bet, their main play for getting the economy moving, is still squarely on building more roads, more railways, and more ports.
All right, let's flip the coin and look at the other side of Iyer's argument. We've talked about all the small nudges that were in the budget. So what about that big bang everyone was buzzing about? The one that never actually happened? And this really gets to the heart of the disconnect. On one hand, you had the expectation, a huge 1991 moment to tackle the country's biggest economic problems head-on. And on the other hand, you have the reality. What they got was a fiscally prudent path. Basically, a super cautious plan that was all about stability and steering clear of any big, risky moves.
So, what exactly does fiscal prudence mean in this context?
Well, according to Iyer's take, it was a very deliberate choice.
It means the government decided to prioritize one thing above all else: controlling its spending and debt. They put that ahead of chasing those big, potentially transformative reforms that also would have been a lot riskier.
And this is where things get serious. According to IR, by playing it so safe, the government left some of the economy's biggest, most urgent problems just sitting there. It brings up a few really high-stakes questions that the budget just seems to have dodged completely.
First up on Iyer's list of unanswered questions, the rupee. It's been sliding against the dollar for a while now, and that affects everything, right? From how much we pay for imports to inflation at home. But he argues the budget gave, well, no clear plan at all for how to stop that slide.
Okay, next up, foreign investment. Iyer points to the fact that foreign investors have been pulling their money out, which is never a good sign. It suggests confidence is shaky. So his question is pretty simple. What's in this budget that's actually going to convince them to stop selling and start investing in India again?
And his final big question is all about execution. I mean, with all these new, super specific little schemes, AR is pretty skeptical. He looks back at big, ambitious programs from the past, like the whole Smart City initiative, and how they didn't really live up to the hype. So he's asking a tough but fair question. Are these new ideas actually going to work? Or are they just going to end up on the same pile of well-intentioned but failed programs?
All this skepticism really brings us to Iyer's final point, his big critique. It's his verdict on why a budget that's packed with so many little ideas
might in the end just not be enough.
And his conclusion is really powerful. He says, look, the problem isn't that there are no ideas in this budget. The real problem is that they're all lost in the fog of minutia. Such a great phrase. The big picture, that clear vision for the economy, just gets completely swallowed up by a cloud of tiny details. And that leaves everyone, from regular citizens to big investors, just squinting, trying to figure out where exactly we're all headed.
But here's the thing. Ayer doesn't just criticize and walk away. He actually offers a potential solution. He suggests a path forward that's all about radical transparency. We're talking about things like publishing FAQs, holding town halls to explain things clearly, putting out 6-month progress reports, basically being held accountable. He argues that's the only way to show people that all these hundreds of little ideas are genuinely adding up to something real.
And that leaves us with the big hanging question that Ayer puts on the table. In a world that feels pretty uncertain and volatile right now, was this quiet, super cautious budget the smart, safe play? Or was it a huge missed opportunity to really go after India's biggest challenges with everything they had? I guess as he suggests, we're all just going to have to wait and see.